trip so far?
Quite good.
Yeah? Good.
So I may want to introduce Dharma for our guest. Michelle, she worked for, she is a chief designer in the jewelry company. She herself managed the jewelry group.
Yeah.
Okay. And Sheila Banker. Mr. Han, IT specialist.
Okay.
And also, this is Dr. C from Hong Kong University.
I think we're just waiting for Stuart.
Okay.
We'll get out of the way.
Okay.
That's okay. We'll just see how they we can start. Just wanted to talk a little bit about classic cars as an alternate investment. The choice of classic cars and motorcycles as an alternate investment has been growing substantially over the last few years. And over the last 10 years, they've provided a better return than other alternate assets, and to a degree, some of the actual financial investments. Simply put, the reason why classic cars, particularly the cars of what we call an investment grade, so high-end Ferraris, BMW, Mercedes, Porsche, the primary reason why these have been growing in value is that they're not being manufactured anymore. You just cannot buy another Enzo period Ferrari. So, as more and more cars are produced every year, these become rarer and rarer. And the returns have been very, very good. The returns in the UK, or basing the car in the UK, the returns are improved as well because there is no capital gains tax. It's considered a wasting asset. So if you buy a car and make a substantial profit on it, there's no tax on that profit, which is very nice. But the market itself is made up of different levels. So as a whole, the market itself is almost pyramid shaped, with the very best and highest quality and rarest cars at the top of the marketplace, and then coming down the value chain till you get to the bottom, where the cars at the bottom have simply been manufactured in more numbers, therefore they're less rare and they carry less value. That doesn't mean that the marketplace functions uniformly in all of those different levels. Some levels move a little bit quicker than others. Some cars are more types of car are more valuable than others. But in terms of returns, you know, we can see the Hadji indexes, which is a quite well recognised index. Their Ferrari index in 2014 grew 17.5%. Their Porsche index grew 32%. Their overall index was about 16%. This is a Mercedes-Benz index, which was 13%, versus S&P Global, which is in single digits. So far this year, the Ferrari index is up 10.64%. That's to the end of July. Mercedes-Benz has been growing slightly slower. Porsche is still showing good growth. That market has certain peaks and troughs, what we call plateaus. So, for instance, what would be considered what they call affordable classics. So these are the very popular, lots of cars, Triumphs, MGBs. You can see the growth rate there is fairly flat over a long period of time. Cars such as American muscle cars went through very strong periods of growth and peaks, but in 2008, at the time of the financial crisis, values dropped off the cliff, and they're only just now beginning to recover. Ferraris, again, very popular. And about 2011, 358 cars took off. Very, very strong growth, which is just now flattened off a little. And pre-73 cars are still continuing to show very, very strong growth. So each different type of car, each different part of the marketplace moves at slightly different levels. And that's why it's important to get into what we can consider to be investment grade cars, which are typically cars that are £200,000 to £250,000 and higher in value. So to look at the absolute peak of a marketplace, or the peak of the market, this is probably the rarest and most valuable Ferrari you can get, car you can get actually, in that this car itself, Ferrari GTO, which competed in Le Mans, was purchased in the 1970s for about £5,000 and is now valued at 20 million. And the value of that goes up every day. The value of cars is not just a case of how many are left, who made them, it's also about what you can do with the car. So for this, it's what's known as event eligibility. So certain cars, for instance, cars that competed in a very historic race called Mille Miglia before 1958 in Italy, are eligible to go into that race. That increases the value of the car, simply because it can get access to that race. Goodwood is a very, very popular race meeting in the UK. They have the Festival of Speed in March, and then they have the Revival in September. If your car is eligible to take part at Goodwood, that again increases the value of the car. It's the same with the Le Mans Classic and other key events around the world. If your car is old enough and special enough to take part, the car gains more value. Another area where people find differentiation in value is whether the car is considered a driver's car. So some cars are very, very attractive, but aren't necessarily seen as very nice to drive. So Ferrari Daytona is considered horrible to drive below 100 miles an hour and beautiful to drive above 100 miles an hour. So back in the 1970s, not many people drove above 100 miles an hour all the time. So the car wasn't considered particularly valuable. Now, of course, it's considered more valuable simply because of its rarity. Ferrari F40s, Porsche 911s, all considered great drivers' cars and therefore are more attractive to the collector. Another thing that impacts the value of cars is fame and fashion. So the Aston Martin DB5 is not a particularly great car to drive. It's not a particularly fantastic car in terms of design, but when James Bond used one, all of a sudden it became an attractive car. And values of Aston Martin DB5s and their predecessor have shot up to where now a good example of a DB5 in the James Bond colour scheme will cost you £750,000 and still considered a very good investment today. Another part of what is driving the marketplace and driving greater interest in classic cars and hence driving asset values is the intervention of the manufacturers. Between 1948 and 1973, Ferrari produced a total of 13,000 cars. So about 500 cars per year, including all the racing cars. Today they produce 6,500 per year. So in order to keep the brand strong and to keep purchases going well, they link the modern day Ferrari back to the heritage of the old classics when they didn't make as many cars. One of the ways they do this is by running a certification program, so that if you buy an old Ferrari, you can take it to Ferrari headquarters in Maranello. They will inspect the records. They will give you a certificate to say, yes, this is a genuine, matching numbers, engine, chassis Ferrari. It's a little bit, it's not really a warranty, but it's almost a guarantee to the outside collectors that your car is a genuine Ferrari. Aston Martin are doing the same. They now have a large heritage program. Williams Formula One team are selling cars, some of their older racing cars as part of their heritage drive. Alfa Romeo have set up a heritage program. Jaguar have a huge museum and heritage program. And Jaguar will build you an E-Type nowadays. So the manufacturing intervention is bringing the global marketing power of these large automotive brands and putting it into the heritage side of driving the classic car market ever higher. We talked about rarity being a key part of what drives the marketplace, but there's a difference between rarity, because it was a beautiful car and not many were made, and obscurity. You know, it's a very rare car because it's horrible. So you can see in that slide there at the top is a beautiful Aston Martin V12 Lagonda from the 1930s, an M45, really quite rare, maybe 150 left in the world. So commands a good price. That car there was sold for 124,000, but needs complete restoration. The contraption at the bottom, called the Miller's Busy Bee, was built by one man in his garage between 1910 and 1911. It's horrible. But still, somebody bought it. But it will never be valuable, even though it's very, very rare. To get a combination of all the factors together, where you get a car that is both rare, in this case, this is a Ferrari 250 GT, short wheelbase, right-hand drive. There are only 10 right-hand drive cars made out of a total of 167 worldwide. So it's very rare, it's very desirable, and it's also a very good car to drive. This is a car that we will be auctioning in October, and that's me enjoying the drive of that. But that car, because of its rarity, because of its heritage, is estimated in the £4 to £6 million range. They just sold one in Pebble Beach this last weekend. They sold a similar version of this for about $8 million. So it combines all of the attributes you need to create a very serious investment proposition. Another factor that one has to take into account when looking at classic cars as an investment is whether the car requires some restoration. Quite often, rather than paying a full price for a beautifully restored car, you look for a car that needs some light restoration work, which you can buy at a discount to the market value. Then it's just a case of who's used to do the restoration and how you manage the costs of that. Because they can be significant, but they can also add greatly to the value of the car. Another very key important part is originality. In essence, that's what we are looking for classic cars as an asset. You're really looking for a car that is in its most original condition, or at least brought back to its original condition. If it's been modified, it tends to have been modified really for racing, which is fine. But that Ferrari Class E program that we talked about, that certification program, essentially what Ferrari are doing is saying that you come to us, we will give you a certificate to say that your car is as it was driven out of the dealership. So taking it right back to its original condition. Cars that are very original, even if they are not in perfect condition or beautifully restored, cars that are original are very highly sought after. Porsche 911s, for instance, are more valuable when you get them in their original colour scheme. And again, because you're dealing with an asset that's quite old, it may have changed hands and been bought and sold many, many times, been driven a lot, you're looking for continuous history. You're looking for a documentary record. You know, you're all very, very intelligent people. When you were doing your PhDs, etc., you had to do a lot of research. It is no different to the classic car marketplace. The classic car marketplace is all about the research and the documentation that proves the provenance of that vehicle. It's quite fascinating, it's quite time consuming, but it's critical to the value of the vehicle. And the more documentation and photographic evidence you've got, the better. So with that Ferrari I showed you before, that 250 GT, we now have all the factory build records from Maranello, together with all the history of how the car's been driven, all the service records, all about builds value into the car. So I've just gone through a few elements there that we in the classic car market look at when we're considering the value of a car or whether we're considering a car is worthwhile purchasing. And what Rob is going to do now is give you some examples of market opportunities or how the market views certain models of cars from an investment perspective.
Thank you. By background, I'm an investment manager and investment analyst, and what I'm going to try and take you through the thought processes as an investment analyst, looking at classic cars for investment, which you would go through as part of your due diligence. And we're going to start by trying to identify what are the attributes that make a car collectible. And the first of these is market reputation, and cars like the Ferrari, the Aston Martin, the Bentley have a reputation and a heritage and a name which precedes them. We need to look at how many cars were produced. Certainly amongst the premium brands, the older cars were produced in quite a few numbers. The survival rate arguably makes more of an impact on the mass-produced cars. So, for example, Ford built 99,000 Fiesta XR2s. Now, just 642 are left on the road today, and that's one of the reasons why the values of those is picking up strongly, because there's so few left. Nothing more complicated than good old-fashioned supply and demand. We need to look at the strategic significance of the car, and this can take a variety of different forms. It may be a strong racing heritage, which you've obviously got with the Ferraris, Porsches, and the Lotuses. It may be a connection with a film or a TV franchise. The Aston Martin DB5, as Nick's already mentioned, arguably the most famous car on the planet. But this makes a significant impact. Fashionability and perceived brand attractiveness and technology are frequently interlinked, and you'll see the example that we're going to go through just how tied they are. But cars can come into fashion, go out of fashion for apparent reason. This is arguably the most subjective of the factors, but nonetheless it is something that you have to take into account. The technology and economic viability also plays a key role in this, and it's one of the things which determines whether or not a car is a true investment candidate, is if it is economically viable to keep it on the road. There are plenty of absolutely smashing cars out there which are not economically viable to keep on the road. They have to be regarded as an indulgence, not an investment for that reason. But as part of your due diligence, you need to identify that. And finally, it's down to price. There just seems to be this invisible entry point. When a car is worth £50,000 or more, it tends to attract the attention of the international collectors. And once the international collectors who have got pretty deep pockets get interested in getting involved, it tends to propel the prices forward. The second phase of our due diligence process is to identify whereabouts the car is in the depreciation cycle. And we can break down the depreciation cycle for cars into 6 key phases. Phase 1 is the pre-launch grey market premium. Right now, the TBR, the new TBR, which is going to be launched in 2017, is in this sweet spot. The new TBR has been designed by Gordon Murray, the Formula 1 designer, and it's powered by a Cosworth V8 engine. There is terrific excitement in the car world at this new car which is coming out. The TBR are currently taking deposits for them, and the clever people are already putting down a deposit now because the first year or two there will be very few will be built, and they'll be able to sell those cars on at premium to this price and make a very, very handsome profit. But the new TBR is going to be positioned to compete with the Porsche 911 and the Aston Martin V8 Advantage, and this price will be about £75,000 or thereabouts. In that first year, when the cars are still, the production line is not fully up and running, only a few hundred will be produced, those cars could easily sell for between £90,000 and £100,000 because people want to be the first one to buy these cars and to own them. The phase 2 is the list when it comes out of this price. This will happen probably a couple of years after TBR production, when the production line is up and running fully, demand will be satisfied by ongoing production, so that the car won't sell the premium more, it will just sell at this price. Phase 3 is the price decline, which can take a very long time. 15 years is quite typical, and certainly with the premium branded cars, they will come back to maybe somewhere between a third and a half of their original price. For the mass-produced cars, they can fall to 10% or less of their original manufacturer to this price. Phase 4 is where it gets interesting, because the price starts to bottom out. And at this point, your car, which up until now has been nothing more than a double, it potentially becomes an investment. It either becomes a value investment or a value trap, and the trick is to spot which one it is. Phase 5, it gets even better, because then the price starts to increase and your car, its investment status at this point starts to be confirmed. And phase 6 is when the car goes through its manufacturer's list price and it's on an upward trend. And once that happens, the car prices seem to develop a momentum of their own. And at that point, your value investment is demonstrating some very strong momentum, and we then classify it as being a momentum investment. Now, you've seen from the indices that the Ferraris and Porsches and Ferraris particularly perform very, very strongly. And what I spend a lot of time doing is trying to identify the cars which are going to be the next big thing. The ones we effectively try and call the bottom in the pricing, the depreciation curve, because that's obviously where as an investor you can really make a lot of money if you call it right. And we're going to look now at some examples of cars which are in phases 4, 5 and 6 of the depreciation cycle. The car we're going to start with is the Aston Martin DBX, which is in phase 6 of the depreciation phase. Let's look at our key variables. Market reputation, well, Aston Martin, as we said earlier, is very much a premium brand. Survival rates, most of these cars survive, but only 803 were built in the first place. That means they are very, very rare. Still, it has a strategic difference. This was a Bond accident driven by George Lazenby, the North National Secret Service. Any accident used in a Bond film has a certain cachet about it. The fashionability and technology factors in many ways are interlinked, because for many years this car was very much out of fashion. It wasn't the most reliable car that was built. There were particular problems with it mechanically. The injection system in particular was an issue with this. They were notoriously unreliable. For that reason, these cars were out of fashion for a very, very long time indeed. But one of the benefits of technology has been that people who've looked at these cars, identified the problems, and without compromising the originality, they've been able to re-engineer the components to make them more reliable. And this coincided with the big uplift we saw in the DB4s, DB5s and DB6s. The DBS being left behind, it looked enormously cheap. So 15 years ago, the DBS was in phase 4 of the depreciation cycle. It was viewed as being a value trap because it cost you more to keep everything on the road than it was ever going to be worth. But with that change of perception and that those technological advances that have been made, the DBS is now being re-rated by the market, as you can see from the price chart. It's year 2000, you can buy one of these for just £6,000. Buy one today for a good one, you're going to pay £120,000. That's a 20-fold increase in 15 years, which it makes it obviously a very attractive investment. But now people are like on the story. There was an article in the British Motion Press last week by Quentin Wilson, who is one of the leading financial and motor journalists as well, and he's predicted that the DBS is going to go to 300,000 over the next 3 to 5 years. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but just the point of illustrating an example, when you get it right, you can get it very right in this area. Our next example is an example of a car which is in phase 4 of the depreciation cycle, and is classified as a value track. The Lotus Esprit Turbo. Now, it does distress me in some ways to talk about the Lotus Esprit in such a negative way, because on the face of it, if you look at the key variables, it's really got a lot going for it. The market reputation, its racing heritage is probably second only to Ferrari. In terms of survival rates, just 796 of these cars were built, which makes them pretty rare. It has the strategic significance of being a Bond car, was driven by Roger Moore in the two Bond films, Despite Lovely and For Your Eyes Only. In fashionability, I don't think the Lotus Esprit has ever been out of fashion. People love this wedge-shaped car. It's a great car to drive. It really is a great car. But what really compromises this is the financial viability, because these cars are very, very expensive to maintain and keep on the road. If you take this car in for a service, just a basic service, it's 15 hours of labour immediately before you find out what's wrong with it. If you need to change the windscreen wiper motor, you've got to take out the entire instrument umbilical inside just to get to it. They also, because the bodies are fiberglass, they tend to rot terribly, so there's no point in buying one of these unless the chassis is being restored. A phenomenally expensive job. But this is the problem with the Lotus. It costs £26,000 to buy it new. They're worth about £15,000 today. And in terms of the cost of keeping it on the road, I couldn't give you a clue as to how much you have to spend on it. But a great car to drive, but this is purely an indulgence, not an investment. Our third example is the Ferrari 355. This is an example of a car which is in phase 5 of the depreciation cycle. Ferrari is arguably the most powerful brand in the world, no question about it. Everyone around the world, you ask them to suggest what their favourite car is, I think the majority would say a Ferrari of one description or another. In terms of
concessionaire, the second Ferrari, a 1967 275 GTB4, is one of only 27 right-hand drive cars brought to the UK. Richard was a true Ferrari enthusiast, lovingly maintaining and cherishing these cars, and above all, driving them on regular trips across Europe. Rallies and at many Ferrari amateur events. What makes them a unique proposition is that not only do prospective buyers have the opportunity to perhaps acquire the car of their dreams, but that the proceeds of the sale are being donated to the RNLI, an organisation whose volunteers work tirelessly and put their lives on the line to keep all those at sea safe and sound.
So what's unusual about the sale of these cars, they're both high investment grade cars. The red car, 250 GT, is the estimate is £4 to £6 million sterling. The 275 GTB4 is 1.5 to 2 million value. But the money from the sale of both cars are being donated to the Lifeboat charity. This guy's legacy, which is very unusual, and also got an awful lot of press and TV coverage because of that. That is one of the 550 Maranello, which belongs to the same family as one of his cars. And he also has two Jaguars that we're selling as well, an XK120 and an E-Type lightweight replica. So they will be coming up for auction on the 14th of October. And because they are at that very, very special investment grade level, there's a huge amount of interest in it.
So, Nick, how about maybe, because most of the guys are from Hong Kong, the girls are from Hong Kong, how does that fit into, what do overseas investors do with the vehicles, with the options?
Even though Hong Kong's right-hand drive and you don't have anything punitive against classic cars in Hong Kong, you just have a complicated procedure to get the cars registered for the road and tested and approved, which can be done. But again, what you may find there is you may have to make modifications to the car depending on what it is. So there have to be rear seat belts fitted. Well, if you're buying a car from the 1960s where fitting rear seat belts to it does something, doesn't really do anything to the chassis, but in effect you're bolting something on that's not original, that could potentially affect the value. So the simple terms, or the simple approach would be to identify the fact that yes, okay, I'm interested in classic cars as an alternate investment, out of my overall portfolio, I want to allocate $100,000 or $500,000 or $1 million. You come to me, say, what can we get for this? What would be a very sensible acquisition for me? I'm looking to hold this car for 3 years or 5 years. I would like occasionally to be able to drive the car when I visit. We would source that in the UK or Europe. We keep it in the UK. We have very safe and secure warehouses where these cars are. We would maintain that car throughout the year. What you would get is every quarter you would get a video log showing the car, showing us turning the engine over, showing us driving it around so you can see the car's being maintained properly. And then if you want to fly over or if you're on one of your business trips and you say, okay, I've got an important meeting with some clients, can I take the E-Type, can I take the Ferrari? Then we'll get it delivered where you are. You can drive to your meeting or drive on your vacation and then leave it with us and we'll look after it. Also, when it comes to the time when you say, okay, we think the value has gone up by 20%, 30%, I'm ready to cash that investment in, we'll take care of the sale of that for you and then remit the proceeds to wherever you want them sent worldwide. And it's as simple as that. But keeping it in the UK, you're keeping it in an environment where, yes, it's very stable from an economic perspective, but there's also a very proactive and very positive leaning towards classic cars. People love classic cars in the UK, so the government is very proactive in terms of classic cars. You know, one of the directors of our company, Sir Greg Knight, is a member of Parliament, and he also chairs a parliamentary group on historic vehicles. And so there's a constant lobbying of the government to keep regulation away from old cars, and that's the case. So it is an unregulated asset because, yeah, it's just a car. But underneath that, the marketplace is very well structured. And in the UK, you've got a government that actually cherishes classic cars. So that is the best way to invest in a classic car, is to not, because as soon as you try to start shipping back, even shipping back to Hong Kong, it might only cost you $5,000 or $10,000 to ship it back. But every time you move that car, you're incurring cost. And therefore, you're increasing the hurdle rate that you've got to get to before you start making a return on your investment. If you buy it, you keep it somewhere that it's not going to move unless you want to drive it, then you're minimising the management cost of that investment. But being a purist, I know we're talking about this from an investment perspective, but if you've got a beautiful Ferrari sat in the warehouse waiting to be driven, or you've got a gorgeous Aston Martin, it's really worth getting a plane ticket and flying over and having a long weekend and driving the car around. But as I said before, also with some of those cars, it may just be a big classic car event that you say, okay, well I want to go to the classic car event, or fly in, or I want to go to the Salon Privé Concours d'Elegance, or maybe enter your car into one of those competitions, because if you win a Concours d'Elegance, that increases the value of your car. So there's a lot of things you can do from the UK base, which are very expensive to do from, for instance, a base in Hong Kong. So if you've got your car repatriated to Hong Kong, it then becomes expensive if you want to enter that car into an event worldwide, because you've got to ship it back and back again. Whereas if it's in the UK, it's much cheaper for us to move it, particularly across Europe, because essentially we're just putting it onto the back of a transporter and driving it across to Italy or France or wherever the event is that takes place. One company that we work with called Hero Rallies, there is a phenomenon called classic rallying, where essentially if you own a good quality classic car, then you can take part in a rally. And what that would be is that would be 20 or 25 people like yourself, all with classic cars, that want to go on an adventure together. So they do the Paris Peking, they do the Paris Madrid, They do Whisky Tour Scotland. So there are many ways in which you can use that car, other than just having it sat in the warehouse appreciating value. Using the car will not diminish the value unless the car is restored to what we call a concours condition. So the car is so beautiful, so clean, so polished, underneath, inside and out, that you don't actually want to drive it. I know there are cars like that. Ralph Lauren, he regularly wins Concours prizes because he has a very beautiful Bugatti that he enters that's worth millions and millions of dollars. That car doesn't go anywhere except from his museum to whatever the event is that's taking place. Bernie Eccleston, the Formula One chairman, I've been to his private collection, which it's just a fantastic array of Formula One cars that just are never used. They're just sitting in a museum with a chap looking after those cars full time. So there is a huge market in classic cars, and it's a very stable market because, as Rob said, it's underpinned by cash. People are buying these cars not with debt but with cash, and that keeps the market strong. But again, as with any asset of this type, it's all about the car. It's down to the quality of the car, or motorcycles. The motorcycles are what interests you as well, because obviously motorcycles are smaller and easier to deal with. But yeah, it's all about getting the right quality of car, with the right history and the right documentation. And there's plenty of them out there. You just have to get the right people looking for them. All right.
Fantastic. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our presentation. What I suggest is maybe we go out, have a cup of coffee together, and if you have any more questions.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.